There's things you're going to miss. But the number one thing is the relationships,
Mm.
right? I won't miss the work as much as I'll miss the relationships I've built over the years.
And it's volunteer, right?
Strictly
You're not
volunteer,
on the
yes.
payroll, so you chose to do this for 3 decades.
Almost 39 years. It would be 39 years
Almost
next
4
April.
decades.
Almost.
Wow, what kept you going back out?
Just the love of the people and understanding that police work a very difficult assignment.
Mhm.
And if I could be supportive in any way, I was going to do that.
Yeah. Which brings us to Constable John Atkinson. When he was shot and killed outside that variety store about 17 and a half years ago, do you remember where you were and how you learned of the news?
I have a police radio, so I monitor what's going on. And when I heard there'd been a shooting, called my wife and said I'm going to go to the scene. And when I got there, that's when I was informed. It was only later that I get a phone call from the chief saying, "Do you know about John Atkinson?" And I said, "Well, I'm on scene. I do know about."
Yeah.
So that was, and then the most difficult part of that was going to inform the family.
You were part of that process.
Yes.
What type of leadership do you provide during those times like that?
Well, just again, it's the responsibility of the chief to do death notification in that situation. I'm just there as a support.
Mm-hmm.
So my particular role that day was to say to the family, "Do you have a spiritual home kind of thing?" And then to go to the home of the priest and let him know. Just try and find supports for them that would be appropriate.
Did that day change at all how you view police officers?
I think I was prepared for it in the sense that I've taken endless amounts of training over the
Mm-hmm.
years, and I remember an officer from Maryland who said to me, "Don't be surprised if in your time with police services you deal with one line of duty death for every 3 suicides."
Yeah.
And his particular concern was more on the suicide, but I had taken all the training that you can possibly get to be prepared for that kind of thing as fully as you can.
Right. There's no preparation. How often are you worried about officers' well-being while you're patrolling in Windsor?
I don't think I worry about it, but I think I understand that
Mm-hmm.
their situation is unique, and particularly along the lines that if any event is personal in any way, it will have some trauma attached to it. So you often run into those situations where an officer, there's something that will remind them of their own life situation, and then you know that there's more to it.
We know policing has changed drastically over the years, and we're going to talk a bit about that. But what concerns you about how that is affecting the health and safety of the officers?
I think the number one thing is that the frequency with which they're required to respond to calls has increased significantly, so that there's no kind of downtime, if we could say that. And they're working 12-hour shifts now. Patrol, at least, is working 12-hour shifts. That's a high demand, and the nature of what they do. For example, in the years that I've been doing it, the increased number of calls, gun calls, for example,
Right.
exponentially greater. Suicides, exponentially greater. And of course, we all know about mental health issues, which are huge.
Mm-hmm. The big fog event I wanted to mention with you as well. That was the 401. That was about 25 years ago now. Do you remember that day?
I'll never forget that
Yeah.
day. You could never forget it. And I think the thing that I became aware of that day is I often say there's a difference between law enforcement, fire, and ambulance. And that day I learned that maybe the most traumatic part of that was not for police officers as it was for fire.
Okay.
You know, for a fire person, and I had known a number of the firefighters there, but for a firefighter to say, "I just watched 2 kids die and I could do nothing because I had no water,"
Mm.
that trauma of that is unimaginable.
When officers come to you with these traumatic events or these hints of PTSD, you also are tapped into a community of people who help that, right? The peer
Exactly.
support. So
Yes.
how do you come alongside that officer, and how has that changed over the years?
Well, the one thing that's changed hugely is the fact that there is peer support, and it's much more intentional now than it was. There's all kinds of resources available to police officers if they choose to take advantage of those. So there's a lot more support systems, and there's not the same kind of get over it kind of mentality that used to exist.
When do you think that changed?
I think that's just gradually changed.
Hmm.
And I think as much as the acknowledgement of PTSD has grown, I'm I've been pushing lately for people to understand there's another thing that's pretty impactful, and that's called moral injury. And unfortunately, if you're diagnosed with PTSD, you can get psychological help. If you're diagnosed with some kind of moral injury, there's not the financial support for that yet. So I'm hopeful that that will come into play as well.
How do you look after your health in all of this?
I have a great group of guys. I have a small group of guys that I'm accountable to, and they can help me debrief some of these things. I have certain police officers that I can trust with letting them know where I'm at,
Hmm.
and I have a faith that makes a difference.
Yeah,
So
that's what I was thinking. And I also wonder how much your faith plays a role when you're with the officers. Are people seeking that part of your leadership, or do you put that on the back burner? Where is it?
that's up to them. That's their
Yeah.
initiative. I'm not the one that will impose anything upon them. I remember a police officer I rode his second last shift before retirement, and he said, "When I first heard you're going to be riding with me, I thought this is going to be a god awful shift." And I said, "Well, what is it like now?" And he says, "You're a friend, and I don't want to lose that friendship because I retire." So I have lots of support systems.
And that makes you emotional.
Yes.
Yeah. It's the relationship and it's the ride alongs that is that.
Ride-alongs are my indoor.
Hmm.
That's part of why I'm retiring at this point, is I don't want to I don't want to put officers at risk, and I just don't think I'm capable of what I was in earlier years. So
Explain that. What do you mean? Being a distraction? Being.
just physically, I'm not capable of the things that I was capable. Not that I was going to be doing any of their job, but just being alongside of them, and they feel responsibility for you.
You're right. Retired. Now what?
I think I heard your interview with Sheila Wisdom, and I think I'm kind of in the same vein. It's time to just sit back a little bit and
Right.
not have to be thinking, what is there something coming that I need to be aware of?
Are you going to be documenting any of your 40 years?
I've often thought I'd like to write a book called Tales from the Backseat of a Police Cruiser, because in the early days when you're riding with two officers, you spent your time in the back seat. And I've
Right.
got stories, right?
I don't
I've
know if
got
you'd want to be in the
stories.
back seat now, but
Well, I learned to ride with sergeants over the
yeah.
years so I could be in the front seat.
Yeah, I was going to say you might need a little bit of an upgrade after 40 years. I think they should put you in the front seat. All right, Chuck, thank you so much for coming in this morning. I appreciate it.
My delight,
We
Amy, and
wish
I
you,
appreciate it.
yeah, we wish you all the best in your retirement and